Inside your spotlight this morning, we're discussing women empowerment principles in Trinidad and Tobago. To do that, I welcome representative of the UN Women Multi-Country Office in the Caribbean, Tony Broadbent, as well as the co-founder and head of product at Drop Caribbean, Lindsay Williams. Good morning, ladies. Welcome to the show.
Morning.
Good morning.
How are we doing this morning?
Good. It's a early morning, but we're good.
Very grateful for you waking up this early and joining us. Tony, let's start with you. What are the women empowerment principles and how do they contribute to advancing gender equality in the workplace, marketplace, and in the community?
So we're speaking in light of this being a celebration of Equal Pay for Equal Work Day. And a few years ago, the UN Global Compact, which in the Caribbean is now led by a Trinidadian, Kiana Bowen, and UN Women came together to say, how can we make it easy for businesses to have very tangible ways to understand how best they can make their companies more inclusive? And that's how we came up with these seven principles. The second principle is about equal pay for equal work, but all of the principles speak to creating an enabling environment, removing discriminatory barriers, and they are beneficial to women, but also, like most things that we do to improve the space for women and girls, they also benefit men and boys and families as well. So for example, one of the principles speaks to ensuring you have parental leave. We're not only speaking about maternity leave, but understanding that many men need to have not only paternity leave, more than 3 days, especially if your wife had a C-section. You need more than 3 days to bond with your child. And also men and women now, especially in our economies in the Caribbean, have elderly parents that we need to take care of. How can businesses use these principles to really create a space where people want to stay because you recognize an individual as a whole being and not just as an employee?
And that seems like practical, right? Like it seems like logical that we should say, we should have a better working environment so that we'll have better productivity. How have companies been responding to it?
So across the Caribbean, we have 56 companies that have already signed on, including Liberty Latin America, which is Flow in our region.
Right.
And now we're excited that Drop is going to sign on as well, because there are only 4 companies in Trinidad and Tobago that have signed up out of that 56 in the region, and as the English-speaking Caribbean.
What do you think the challenges are with companies in Trinidad and Tobago signing on?
I don't know if it's only their responsibility. We also have our work to do around advocating and encouraging companies to come on board, which we've been doing much more of lately. But they are not necessarily afraid. I think they're trying to better understand why. And we're really excited that we have Drop on board to say why they're signing on.
Well, let's hear from Lindsay now. Morning, Lindsay.
Morning.
Tell us about Drop Caribbean, first of all.
I guess you would probably know Food Drop as the more number one product from us. But we are a food delivery app, and we are also branching out now into retail and other verticals as we continue to grow. So it was lovely meeting with the team at the UN. I think we naturally had a lot of principles that organically meshed very well. And obviously, as you just said, when you hear from Tony and the team, it sounds very practical, right? So I think a lot of businesses, as you said, organically or would organically like to have a lot of these frameworks and everything, but I think it's difficult, and I think that's what the team has enabled, is that an actual framework and to formalize these principles and give it to businesses. Because I think in the most ideal world, yes, you do have, a lot of these principles already in your business, so you're trying to accomplish them. But having them formalized in a framework can actually give you goals and, something to work towards.
What do you hope to achieve, or what does Drop hope to achieve by aligning with these principles?
I think our number one goal is always growth. And without inclusion, you cannot have growth. In order to speed up growth or to have any type of growth, you have to have an inclusive marketplace, an inclusive company, because all of those things add to the growth of your company and being able to empower and enable all of your workers and everybody that you work with.
Tony, tell me, how does the UN Women support businesses in adopting the women empowerment principles?
So we walk businesses first through what it is. And the good thing about this, you don't have to pay anything to be part of the women's empowerment principles. But you do have to be accountable in holding yourself to the standards that you have signed up on to. We support the businesses with first doing a gender analysis of what's happening, a gender gap analysis. What does your board look like? What does your senior management look like? We're always celebrating, because in the Caribbean, we have the countries with the highest level of women managers, but are they middle managers? Are they lower managers? Where are they in our companies? We also look at what is your paternity leave, what's your sexual harassment policy Do you have a domestic violence policy? How do you support your staff who have either been charged with or who are victims of? And so we work through all of that with them. What does your procurement chain look like? This is a big thing. Like, who are you buying from? So you're starting to think all through, where are you really getting your product from and who's benefiting most? And that speaks to what Lindsay was saying about an inclusive marketplace.
Yeah.
You should also have an inclusive product base to be able to draw from to get that inclusive marketplace. So we do that first. We do trainings. We help draft and support them with sexual harassment policies. And of course, in our region, we're accustomed to say, you look nice. That's not sexual harassment. If you say somebody look nice and they tell you, I don't like that, and you keep doing it, then we started to get into a space where we get into harassment.
Right.
So letting people understand this is not about completely muting our culture. It is understanding where aspects of our culture can create discomfort for others. And then there's some blatant aspects of our culture that we really probably need to revisit. Just because something is culture doesn't mean it's not dynamic and doesn't change. So these are some of the ways in which we've been helping companies, not only getting them on board, but walking them through the process. And it's not to name and shame.
Yeah.
It is really to empower to do better.
And so I get very interested and intrigued about this part of it, because the first thing that you mentioned just now was, looking at the board of directors, looking at the management levels and that kind of thing. And I wonder, is it that we're looking for equality, or are we looking for efficiency when it comes to, is it the most qualified person should get the job, or it should be balanced? Is that how we look at, which way do we look at it?
So I love the conversation, right? So generally, why is it that we don't feel that the most qualified would also look at balance? When you correct for some of the gaps, for example, if we didn't, in the 1950s, said only people who went to QRC can get this job, you're only getting men. Right? But when you break it up and you say QRC, bishops, convent, CIC, you're going to get persons who come from both schools, which happen to be same-sex schools at the time, right? You also look at, well, only people who did physics and chemistry. If the girls' school's not offering those things, how do we know if girls are good at it? And I think there are a lot of, let's go to just movies that show there are invisible figures that are excellent. If we look at the Hidden Figures movie, you wouldn't know that there were black women in the US behind some of those space launches. Because you'd think, oh, well, they don't have the qualifications. Or would we know? Not just black women, there were also white women and then many other women who either had the opportunity or didn't because they were invisible.
Right.
So understanding what actually qualifications are, whether the certifications are exclusive or exclusionary, right? And then saying, all right, who is best suited for the job? And generally you'll find who's best suited, you'll find women and men who are best suited. And that's why for some, and in some countries you have affirmative action, and our convention on the elimination of the discrimination of all forms of violence and discrimination against women, CEDAW, speaks to temporary special measures. You put into place special measures to acknowledge where there were exclusions.
Right.
Where there was not an opportunity for everybody to have access to certification or other things. But then after a while, you remove them. Because once you have everybody getting access, you don't need to continue to have that in place, because then who is best?
Right. But
It's not they didn't have barriers to assess who is
but where
best.
do we stand now in 2024? Because everybody's had access to education. I mean, Trinidad and Tobago education is more or less free. We had GATE for university level education. We have people graduating year after year, both men and women. So are we in a place where we need to have those temporary stopgap measures in, or are we in a better place to say, well, who's most qualified, most suitable for the job, because everybody is available, all the information is available?
So I would say we really need to then deep digger. Do we have quality education accessible for everyone? I'm sure you all had a conversation when CSEC results came out.
Right.
And the fact that even though Trinidad and Tobago did better than the regional figures for passing math, we still did not get 50% of the people sit in CSEC passing math.
Right.
So these special measures, yes, we use them for sex-based discrimination, but you also need to be looking at them for economic discriminations, where you're recognizing that some people, I was driving from the airport on the bus route, And I was looking at who was waiting. I saw the uniforms, who was waiting for the buses. And I asked why one school. I didn't see one school. I saw a few schools, but I didn't see one school. And I said, oh, that school, people dropping them to school. They don't need to wait for the bus. So we do have economic barriers to entry to good education, quality education in our schools and across the board that we need to actually look at. And who gets after school lessons? Who gets all of these things we have to really look at, and whether the teachers, and this gets to the equal pay for equal work, do we value the work that we see a lot of women in through our remuneration, right? Because if we keep seeing our teachers and nurses, and this is my colleagues at IOM will tell us, who's migrating and which countries are benefiting from our very skilled workers. These are things we have to start looking at to say, do we need to stop these temporary special measures? Because as far as I see it, and I'm sure most people, and I'm not speaking just from my personal anecdotal who I saw on the bus route, but the data is telling us that still we need these things in place to even the playing field.
Lindsay, tell me, at Drop Caribbean, how do you envision these empowerment principles for women impacting the culture of the company itself?
Well, I mean, we spoke about it before, but I think it gives, again, a formalized and a framework that companies can work with to be able to have transparency and measure, the different things that you're doing. But I think, so our company is pretty small compared to probably, the
bigger corporate
entities, and then even the people that we work with. So we're a marketplace. So we work with hundreds of drivers, hundreds of businesses, and I think, as Tony said.
But I have to ask, do you have equal drivers, both men and women?
Well, so we do have data, and we do have a lot of female drivers. I think people will be very surprised, maybe if you probably order, if you don't order food drop or not or whatnot. You will see that we do have a lot of female drivers, and they are excited to participate. And I think that's what Tony is saying, is that I think our approach of having a more informal economy, I guess, that we've created allows a lower entry for women to enter, whether it be from the delivery agent side or from the restaurant and entrepreneur side, because we have a marketplace that, allows you to have a platform and to get your company out there or your small business or even to earn money as a delivery agent. And we see how excited and how much participation we get from female and women. And I think that contributes largely to our growth, in all honesty.
Are there policies in place to deal with security concerns?
We have internal policies, yes, that our team are aware of, that we do manage.
Nice. Do you see these empowerment principles having to adjust anything in major when it comes to your policies that exist currently?
No, and again, because I think organically, and we have a lot in common with, I think with growth, you have to have inclusion. I think it's almost impossible to have massive growth and to have quick growth without being inclusive. I think it's inevitable. You have to be inclusive in order to grow quickly, especially with marketplaces and these type of tech and innovative businesses. You will inevitably include everybody.
All right, Tony, before we go, what steps can individuals or businesses or companies take to make sure that they have more inclusion, to make sure that they embrace these women empowerment principles?
Well, I mean, the first step is they can reach out to us. You can reach out to us on caribbean.unwomen.org. We have a team based in Trinidad and Tobago, and you can learn more about the women's empowerment principles. We're happy to share more about it. But I think first, all of us have to decide that this is important, because as Lindsay was saying, if you want growth, we understand there's a bottom line for most businesses. If you want growth, what leads to that? And again, the data speaks to inclusion. Understanding who you're selling to means that you're selling not only to one sex, usually. I mean, there's some products that are only relevant to one sex. But otherwise, you still need to understand who's buying and why. And that's all people. So if you have them as part of your decision-making team, as part of a better understanding of when and what kind of products need to be done or to tweak, like Food Drop is an amazing product that, at least in Trinidad and Tobago, where we love our food, has really demonstrated the importance of why this kind of thing would be necessary, including for breastfeeding mothers, new parents, older people. And by having an inclusive approach, that's how you know who your customer base is. So one, being honest about why and how to get to growth, and then also deciding that you're going to be accountable. It's important, and you're going to be accountable, and you're going to hold yourself accountable, not to shame, but again, for your betterment as a business and for those employees that you have.
Well, ladies, let me say thank you very much for joining us this morning and having this conversation. I think it's a conversation that will go on, and I want to encourage people to reach out and get more information and get involved and get your women's empowerment principles. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, we need more than 4 companies to sign on.
Absolutely.
I feel like we need some more. So, representative of the UN Women Multi-Country Office in the Caribbean, Tony Broadbaugh, and co-founder and head of product at Drop Caribbean, Lindsay Williams, joining us this morning to chat a bit about the women's empowerment principles right here in Trinidad and Tobago. We take a quick break. We come back with more in our morning show. Stay tuned.